Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, crisis management, well being, COVID, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have us talk about a specific topic, you can reach me through LinkedIn. I'm the only Alex Fullick there, so I'm really easy to find. Just send me a message and I'll reach out and we'll see about getting you on the show. I do respond to everything I get. I will be I will be speaking at three conferences later this year. October, the Continuity Insights Conference, October 4th to 6th in Minneapolis. November 3rd to 4th, I'm speaking as part of the BCI World Virtual Conference. And December 1st to 2nd, I will be speaking at the Continuity and Resilience Today conference in Toronto. Hopefully, travel restrictions will be lifted and I can actually make those conferences in person this year. But we'll see what happens. Today, we're going to be talking about risk and resilience, discussing the hard stuff. And some of you may recognize my guest off to the side here. He's been on the show twice before. We talked about resilience, and I recommend everyone go take a look at those videos. Lots of great information. And as an FYI, it was only supposed to be one show, and it turned into two full episodes. So I'm really excited today to see just how far we get in our agenda. And I'd like to welcome back to the show, Dr. Gavriel Schneider. Gav, welcome back.
Thanks, Alex. Great to be back.
How are things in sunny Australia?
Well, it's the middle of winter, so it's still sunny, but it's a bit chilly. But compared to what you go through in Canada, it's probably not that bad.
I have been to Australia in winter, and your winters are warmer than our summers. So I'm not sure what you mean by chilly.
It's all about perspective and context, right?
Exactly. I think you're in Brisbane, right?
Correct. I'm in Brisbane.
Yeah, that's where I was. And believe me, that did not feel like winter.
Yeah, but I guess to answer your question, I think it's interesting. Everybody thought we'd be coming out of COVID, and Australia is really in the midst of, really harsh lockdowns and major challenges, which probably echo almost where we were a year ago. So in some ways, it's almost back to the future. And in terms of discussing risk and resilience, it's a good topic for us to think about because clearly there's been some limitations in decisions and forward thinking for us to have landed up back where we are again.
Yeah, and the same kind of things are happening here in Canada as well. So far, we're not back in lockdown. We're, quote, opening up, but we'll see how far that gets based on where things go. If it's lessons learned or if, back to the future, then yeah, you're right. We may be actually where we were a year ago, but fingers crossed, I'm going to be optimistic that no, we're not going to be back where we were a year ago. Now, I know we're going to talk about risk and resilience today, but just in case anyone didn't see or haven't yet watched the two sessions we did on resilience, personal resilience, which is the term you coined. So make sure you get credit for that. Can you give us a quick bio on yourself? Because you also have some good news to share as well.
Oh, thanks, Alex. Today I found out for the third year in a row I've made the IFSEC top 20 global influencers in security and fire. So I think I'm the only one to have made it 3 years in a row, but
congratulations.
Nice kudos. But yeah, in a snapshot, I'm the CEO of the Risk to Solution group of 5 companies that focus on risk and culture change, safety, security, business continuity, medical health, and technology. Our goal is to be a leading partner when it comes to integrated risk and thinking about how we do things better when it comes to opportunity centrism, not just managing the bad stuff.
Yeah.
My background, I started my career training and teaching martial arts as defensive tactics instructor, became a professional bodyguard back in South Africa, and basically became fascinated with decision making and started researching decision making and consequence, and started my own business in 2000. So it's just over 20 years now that I've been running my own businesses. and also present and host a postgraduate program in the psychology of risk, which we do with Australian Catholic University here in Australia. And I've been doing that for 6 years now.
Great. And congratulations once again on the announcement today. That's really good. First one 3 years in a row. So, okay.
Thanks, Alex.
Now, we're going to talk about risk and resilience, discussing the hard stuff. So I'm looking forward to this chat, see where it goes. So my first question for you, how does the way we think about risk and resilience impact our approach to risk and resilience? Now, I want to add to that, is that when we say how the way we think, is that as an individual, and what is it, how does it impact organizational thinking?
Great question. And this will probably be the whole 45 minutes once we get into it. But I think the key thing to look at here is one of the things we get fixated with even if we talk, I like to talk on 4 levels, as we've discussed: individual, team, organization, and societal. So it depends which perspective you're wearing as to, how does the way we think about risk impact us? The challenge I think we found is that all 4 of those dimensions are interrelated and interdependent. And from an organizational risk and resilience perspective, we tend to think about it, from the metrics of profit, or, if you're in a not-for-profit, it's manifesting whatever the vision and mission of your organization is. What we tend to miss is the requirement to align thinking to get good outputs. And on a very simplistic level, you cannot thrive in terms of great risk and resilience if we don't understand the way we firstly absorb information and data, secondly, how we process it, and then thirdly, how we evaluate it to make a decision. There is a 4th component to that, which is acting on our decision. But realistically, if we really want to unpack this and get some real meat behind how do we do this better, it does start with an inward journey. And if you don't understand yourself, your own quirks, flaws, biases, etc., then very often when we're trying to influence others, it creates cognitive dissonance for them. So they kind of go, hey, you told me to do this, but you don't do it. And we see the same thing that manifests with organizations, where the organizations say, well, here's our risk and resilience strategy. Here is our framework. Here is our policy. Here are the specific rules you have to follow. Here are the risk assessment tools you have to complete. And individuals look at all of that and they go, how does that help me do my job better? That old WIFM, what's in it for me?
It kind of looks like marketing or material, something that'll get you more sales rather than something that enhances the culture.
Exactly right. And the culture piece is really important. As we discussed with the Brazilian stuff, really what we've been focusing on since we released our Brazilians UK Level 5 and Australian skills programs about a month ago is the link between individual and organizational decision-making and resilience, and how to get that segue integrated. Because otherwise what lands up happening is you get these pockets of, let's say pockets of motivated, stimulated, engaged people in an organization who tend to set a bar very high. And then on the opposite side, you get these detractors, antagonists, or people who don't believe in any of this stuff, and it's just a job, and it may even be a job they hate. And, from both perspectives, the people in the job they hate, but they need the money kind of category, every time we give them stuff around risk, resilience, good decision making, for them, we just make their lives suck more from their perspective. Yeah. And it's really interesting that, despite all the best intentions of practitioners in our domains, we tend to forget what the outcome often is. And I've seen this now so many times through our consulting business, where we'll sit with a board or an executive group and, they'll have these real strong perception opinions on what the organization is doing, where it's going, what they need to be doing. And then we'll dig a bit deeper and we'll find that their perceptions are not at all accurate of what's actually happening in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's always a disconnect somewhere. And that's when the employee base see that, to your earlier comment, you're spouting one thing, but you're not doing it.
Absolutely. And this is the intersection of all these different skill sets, attributes, and fields of study, because humans learn best by observation and doing. Right. So when I do something, I learn best. When I value somebody else and I see what they do, I learn very well. We learn arguably the slowest when we are given papers to read, videos to watch, and competency checklists to complete.
Except these videos. I just want to.
Well, these are different because you and I are examining things in a way that is not aligned to just ticking a box. We're actually trying to dig a bit deeper. So if we were having a chat around, here's the 10 things you have to do to be, risk smart and resilient, most of the time, only real, I like to call them risk and resilience nerds like you and I would like that. And, most people are not like us. Most people are not interested in hearing about the bad stuff when they want it. And when they do, perceptual defense springs up and they don't want to talk about it or even think about it. So when somebody, for example, with a business continuity hat comes in and goes, your department or your division has been deemed to be critical for business continuity. Therefore, we're going to do, a criticality assessment and develop a business continuity plan for you and make sure that if you get disrupted, we can keep going. All they're thinking is, why am I going to have to be responsible when things go wrong? As opposed to how could I make sure I bulletproof myself, my division, for the inevitable challenges that face us. And as I'm talking to you, I'm looking at the really cool preparing for unexpected written behind you.
Yeah.
And for the challenge we have, and I really like the work that David Grossman has done in the US around sheepdogs and training our first responders. But it goes bigger than that because very often our first responders naturally have this protectionist mentality. And people who go into risk and resilience also naturally have this protectionist approach. And then we get really frustrated when nobody else does. And it's this, that question you asked about, how does the way we think about it impact it? It's everything, right? The way we think about it is the starting platform for all of it. So on a very simplistic level, if I think it's bad, it's bad. If I think it's wonderful, I'm going to embrace it. But the challenge we've got, and I really wish I remember who actually said it, but the thing we have to focus on is sometimes people think people in risk and resilience are the ultimate pessimists. But realistically, if we flip that and we go, we're optimists, right? We have optimism in the reality that no matter what hits us, we can keep going. And we're going to develop a framework, an approach, build our people and our capabilities to weather any disruption. It comes back to that innate focus on how do we think and how do we feel. And that probably is an interesting segue around the think and feel piece.
Well, actually, I just thought of a question. Do we put, and I mean society in general, and sometimes other industries, put pressure on leadership in financial institutions to focus on the bottom line rather than resilience?
So let's talk about that from a few perspectives. So I think the first perspective is the nature of the world we live in now is complexity, right? Things are so interconnected, interwoven, and we still keep trying to manage complexity with the tools we use to manage simple and complicated systems. So the tools we're using are not actually right for the operating context we're in today. And to your point, fixating and focusing on bottom line may, in reality, in many cases, be the antithesis of good risk management and actually the creation of resilience gaps. And we see this, and I'm just going to quote a few things that are happening from an Australian perspective, but I'm sure there's relevance across the world. In the last 2 years, we had a banking royal commission that looked at, our finance sector and found these pretty significant contradictions where, these large organizations had huge risk teams, business continuity and resilience teams, incredibly compliance-driven operating procedures and manuals. Yet, one of our banks, there were thousands of transactions that breached anti-money laundering legislation. And the challenge we've got is that when it comes to human motivation and human drivers, people will be motivated primarily around what's good for them. So if the driver is bottom line results, and that's the metric, then people are almost incentivized to work around compliance regimes, to figure out ways to break rules that help them achieve that. If our objectives are aligned, it's a bit easier.
That's really the only true metric that everyone understands. How well you're doing, how much money is in the account, what's the price of shares, those kind of things. When it comes to resilience, there really aren't any clearly defined, established metrics to show that we are resilient. It really ends up just becoming, as you mentioned earlier, a tick box somewhere on an audit report, or a verbal, yeah, we are resilient because we, say so.
100%. I really do enjoy talking to you because you get it. And I'm sure most of your listeners get this stuff too, because they deal with these frustrations probably within their own organizations. Mm-hmm. And this is this interesting conundrum. And I think it's important for us to think about who we're talking to. So I've been very lucky in my career. I've worked probably in about 18 different countries doing a broad range of things. And I do find it's very different, from a sort of emerging market third world mentality to a established first world mentality. So I'm assuming most of your listeners would either be in Australia, the UK, the US, or Canada. Mm-hmm. So let's put the first world slant on it and focus on that. But I think it is important to caveat that it's not the same everywhere. And when we have that perception, we often create, the wrong starting point. But let's talk about the first world environments. So we've, over the last, let's say, 300 years is probably the right descriptor, we've become fixated with the benefits of managerialism and the drive for efficiency and results. And don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of that. I run a business. I want to make money, same as everyone else. The problem we've got is the focus on managerialism as the only skill works really well when we have great control of the environment, the situation, and the context we're operating in. Arguably, in the world we live in today, no matter how much control you have, there are aspects we don't control. So, even if we've got a social media policy, we don't control what our people are going to put up there, particularly now with, Gen Zs and millennials so active in the workforce, they habitually post. They don't think about it. It's just part of who they are. Yeah. So, a social media policy that says you can't do it will just get ignored. So part of the conundrum we've got now is no matter how we want to look at it, there are many, many variables we will not control. And when we can accept that, it actually becomes empowering. So it goes back to that question around how do we think about risk and resilience? If we think that, not being able to control everything is a significant flaw and a weakness that has to be overcome by perceived metrics, such as checklists, tick the box, audit programs, overly complex compliance regimes, that they enable us to tick something, yes, we have BCP plans. Yes, we have a risk management framework. Yes, we have this. Yes, we have that. What they don't necessarily measure is how well those things enable the organization's objectives to be achieved in what we have seen over the last 2 years with COVID, a quickly changing and dynamic operating context. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Finish.
Okay, so I was going to say, so the opportunity piece around this actually comes back to trying to look at how do we as individuals, teams, organizations, and eventually societally think about risk and resilience. And if we keep thinking about these things as, I don't want to talk about that, or that's bad news, or that's something I just have to do so that my regulator or, whatever compliance regime says I'm okay, then there's no opportunity centrism and people will continue to not benefit.
I agree. I won't convey this first. I remember actually working for a client, wanting to go to the employees who didn't understand business continuity, go through an awareness session as we were kicking things off, talking with different people. We had some stuff that was developed, and I wanted to talk to people and start getting their input so they became a part of the program rather than me pushing it out to them, right? And I had a vice president who told me, no, we can't do that. And I asked why. And he said, because people will get upset. They don't want to hear about disasters. And I said, well, then what's going to happen, to these people when we do experience a disaster? They're not going to know what's going on. And I looked at him and said, you're not even going to know what's going on because you don't want to talk about it. All you want to do is make sure that these, and there was a list of things that had to get done, they just get done and that's it. I said, that's not going to help anyone.
100%. So that's why, and I urge your listeners to have a look at some of the stuff we've built. This journey from compliance to resilience, it's a journey. But if an organization is stuck in this compliance mindset, which you described really well with your example, the ability to actually weather disruption is exceptionally limited, if not non-existent, based on this idea of the illusion of control. People think they're in control because we've ticked the audit criteria and, we've got papers that say we do stuff.
Yeah.
But you and I both know that, in reality, and almost anybody who's listening to this will probably resonate with what happened to them when COVID kicked in. Even if they were in a very mature organization, they might have had a pandemic plan, but they had to pull that thing out, rip it apart, remanufacture it, adapt it, change it, because the world is different.
Or start from scratch because all they thought of, it's just impacting us and us only. So our plan is, we'll just do this. They didn't see beyond that. A pandemic, a global pandemic, means exactly that, a global impact.
And to your point, we tend to, because of this managerialism centricity that we've had, we have actually got this gap in leadership capability in most large organizations, small organizations, and government departments. It's not the people in leadership and management roles' fault. It's just that the metrics we've previously used over the last 40 or 50 years to promote people up the food chain are managerialism-centric metrics. You're good at implementing process. You're good at, taking people apart when they make a mistake and disciplining them. You're good at covering things up so that the organization looks good. And I'm giving a few harsh examples there, but you probably resonate with those. So the challenge we've got now is the skills we need now are actually a combination of leadership and managerialism, because you can't have too much of one or the other if we want to be able to, do really well during business as usual, but do just as well during disruption. Mm-hmm. Because disruption, as me and you have discussed before, comes with lots of opportunity too.
Yes.
But if we view it only as, to the point you raised, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to worry about it. I don't want to stress my people. In fact, to your point earlier, it reminds me a couple of years ago, we lost a pretty big government tender for resilience development. And in the tender debrief, I took this one quite personally because we were really well placed to deliver it. The feedback from, it was a government department, was, you've lost this tender because you said you would simulate stress for our people. And I said, of course, you want resilience training. How can I show them that some of the tools, systems, approaches we've developed work under stress if we can't simulate stress? They said to me, that's crazy. We could never give someone a contract that would stress our people out. And you kind of sit there and go, but you're saying resilience is now a core value that you want embedded in your organization, yet you're not even willing to stretch your people in a very safe and controlled manner. So we've got a lot of
also a flag to how that department may be running internally, that it's not all rosy and that leader may be seeing things as rosy. We're not going to stress them out. Meanwhile, I can guarantee a lot of those people already are stressed out because you haven't been dealing with that.
And to your point, this is one of those interesting pieces. Yes, COVID has been horrible. I guess unless you're a pharmaceutical company or somebody supplying, PPE and sanitizer, it's been highly disruptive for almost every sector and for individuals at every level. The challenge we've got, though, is what are we going to learn out of this? What are we going to take out of this? And the part that worries me, and why I was really keen to talk to you about this topic, is we've got this massive void of people being able to go, wait, the system or the policy framework or our approach is not as good as it could be, or it's not working at all. And that compliance.
We're gonna take a break right now because I know once we get on that subject, we're gonna keep going. I know it's gonna happen. We're talking about discussing the hard stuff, risk and resilience with Dr. Gavriel Schneider, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Today we are talking with Dr. Gavriel Schneider on risk and resilience, talking and discussing about the hard stuff. Gav, lots of information there in the first segment. I really hope people are paying attention. Just before we had to take a break, we were talking about systems and processes and how that comes into play. And I just wanted to add that for the last 30, 40 years that business continuity has been around, we've focused a lot on response. How we go forward by responding to disasters. Now with resilience, risk and resilience, we have to take a step backwards to be able to go forward. So what are your thoughts on some of the systems and processes that are in place now that may not be working right the way we want them to?
So it's quite interesting. I wrote an article, it must have been nearly 10 years ago now. And originally I wrote it with the security lens, but then we modified it to the greater risk place. And I called it the reactive risk and security spending cycle. And I'm sure anybody who works in a large organization will resonate with the steps I'm about to explain. So if you're a committed professional who works in any of our risk or resilience domains, doesn't really matter which one, you're probably familiar with the challenge of trying to get budget to proactively implement some sort of program, whatever it is, whether it's cybersecurity or whether it's disaster recovery. Primarily because it goes something like this. Nothing's happened, so people don't want to spend on it. Okay? And you might door knock, and you might give them the examples of, oh, but this happened to somebody similar to us. But once management or leadership group's mentality is set that they don't want to think about that stuff, it's very hard to change that, which is why we spend actually a lot of time teaching influence skills as one of the primary skill sets that people in our field should have. But, what tends to happen then is we cruise along, and, most people in the organization are going, we don't need anything to do with risk and resilience because everything seems okay. Then something happens, so incident, whatever it is, and all of a sudden there's this panic spending and people in our field get thrown lots of money to solve the problem. And you need to solve the problem yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And because you have the budget and because you have the buy-in, you are now able to actually do stuff. So what ends up happening is we solve the problem, we do lots of effective things to solve it, and then over time, because we've put things in place, nothing happens again. And what starts to happen then is the organization comes back to whoever the responsible party is and says, nothing's happening, why are we spending money on this? And they start taking the money away.
Mm-hmm.
And they keep taking the money away to the point that vulnerability happens again. And, this poor risk and resilience professional is door knocking going, we don't do this anymore. We don't do that anymore. Remember what happened 10 years ago or whatever it is. And most of the executives or managers are going, yeah, that happened then. It won't happen again. And we become vulnerable again. And the cycle just repeats and repeats and repeats.
Yeah.
So we actually tracked this. We did a little informal study. It was hard to do a formal one, looking at proactive expenditure, resource and budget allocation versus reactive, which is how most organizations budget for this stuff. And without question, we spoke to around 100 professionals about this. It was universal that proactive budgeting is cheaper in the long run. It might be more expensive short term because when people are kind of going, nothing's happening, I don't have to spend anything on this, the thought of spending something is always unpalatable. But when you look at
also a danger that nothing is happening, so people don't participate, whether you've got the budget or not. Right.
And this is the point, right, around individual buy-in to this stuff. So I think the shift with this stuff is so big now because of, we discussed it in our last chat, VUCA, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's our operating norm now. In fact, we could arguably say that stability and control is the exception and VUCA is the norm, not the other way around. And what tends to happen is because most of our senior leaders were trained to be experts in managerialism. And it's an important skill set, but it needs to be an equitable skill set with leadership capability, which we'll talk about and explore, I'm sure, shortly. So the challenge we've got now is a lot of the stuff that we have doesn't work, not because it isn't good. A business continuity plan or, risk systems, they work quite well when they are put in place. In fact, over the last few years, I've become quite confident that most organizations of scale and maturity have effective operational risk methodologies, systems in place. What they don't have is effective application use and buy-in of those systems. And that goes back to almost a three-pronged approach. So if we think about what we're doing to thrive as a modern organization, doesn't matter if it's a business, a city council, or a club, realistically, there's three real ideas we've got, right? We've got this idea of process, policies, and procedures, so the rules and the governance system. And, even an informal group of people will develop one of those approaches. There'll be a natural leader that evolves out of the pack who tells the others what to do and systems and norms develop. We've then become fixated with technology. So many organizations, and if we think about it, this started with spreadsheets. Like spreadsheets are a technological innovation, right? Mm-hmm. And now has evolved to some of these incredible, multifaceted risk resilience, business continuity platforms that enable almost everything you would ever need to be done in risk and resilience to be done virtually. Yet most organizations who've bought those probably only use 10 to 20% of the functionality, if they're used at all. Mm-hmm. In fact, most of the organizations we're talking to have purchased something like this, and they probably fought really hard to get the budget, but are frustrated because they either don't know how the system works, people who work for them don't know how the system works, or they've just gone back to the spreadsheets and stuff they were comfortable with before the system.
Yeah, because some of those applications are so complex and can do so much that it's too much for somebody. And say, I don't understand this. This is too complicated. I'm just going to use it for this because I can understand this.
Exactly right. And the third dimension, so we get governance, policies, process, systems. We get technology. The third domain is the people domain, and this is the conundrum, right? When the focus is managerialism, our primary focus is on concrete metrics, what we discussed earlier. Bottom line, what are we making? What are we losing financially? What is our staff turnover? Those things that are really tangible to feel, which is why very often we'll be consulting and we'll see organizations will invest, thousands and millions in software and audit and assurance, yet they won't build the capability to make sure those two things are effective. And this is the conundrum we've got. We assume that people who arrive at the workplace have all of the skills required. In reality, and you actually raised the point earlier, in reality, we've spent 30 to 40 years wrapping our people in cotton wool and not stretching them, not stressing them, because life is stressful enough. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when we need them to function through disruption, they're not equipped, nor willing, nor able to thrive. Most of the time, they're just hanging on with their fingernails, trying to make it through.
Yeah.
And this is kind of where we've got with COVID now. Most of the time, people are now hanging on, trying to make it through, where realistically, and don't get me wrong, as I said, COVID has been pretty impactful and pretty harsh for most people. But compare that to World War II, where, people were sending their kids off to a high likelihood that they'd never see them again.
Yep.
We are experiencing disruption now. It is frustrating, but realistically, for most people, I think the challenges we've had are the challenges of lack of freedom. I can't do what I want to do. Okay, which, don't get me wrong, is pretty bad when we're used to it, but compared to other challenges, it's quite manageable. So the challenge we've got now is we have to build people differently. We have to actually accept the fact, and you raised the point around resilience, and it's one of my pet hates in consulting, where you talk to executives and boards and leadership teams who tell you, our people are all resilient. They're incredible. Resilience is one of the things that makes us, better than our competitor, or enabled to do whatever we do. And then you look there and you go, yes, there actually are people in the organization who, and I'm thinking of an organization we consult for, who have a lot of frontline staff that deal with aggressive and angry people. And yes, those frontline staff have built a level of resilience because they know what they're in for. But the organization has done next to zero to prepare them for the impact of having to weather those challenges and aggression over time. And I'd heard so many executives in that organization just go, it's not a problem because our people are resilient. And you listen to that and you go, let's just remember the maturity journey I mentioned in our last one, compliance, resilience. If you take a compliance mindset to that, it doesn't stack up because most first world countries have got some sort of occupational health and safety or workplace health and safety legislation, which requires us to reasonably, practicably manage the duty of care associated with exposing our workers to risk. So even from a compliance perspective, not even resilience and presilience, that argument doesn't stack up. So it's and this is the, I guess, real piece now. When we chatted before, we were talking about some of these ideas around leadership and discussing the hard stuff. Mm-hmm. It's not actually just about discussing the hard stuff. It's about accepting the fact that discussing it is not enough. We need to do something about it, and we need to do something in a sustained, ongoing, and continuous manner. Mm-hmm. That's the hard stuff.
I think part of that too, what's hard for either leaders, management of any level, and employees in general, is that emergency management, disaster management, crisis communications, incident management, incident response, problem management, service continuity, all of these focus after an event. And for years, these are the things we've been pushing at people, regardless of what direction you're coming from. They're all after incident processes. And we now, to your point, we've got to change that to, no, we've got to look before. You could have people that can respond to these disasters, incident management, which is fantastic, but they're following a plan, and that doesn't make them resilient. Resilient, the other part of that, to your point, is the prepare part as well. The change in mindset that, yes, something is going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And I know that's an old cliche, but for some reason, people just will not accept that.
Let's examine that for a little, because we're in absolute screaming agreement, right? That part of the challenge now is the shift from reaction to proaction. And this is honestly why we started with the presilience thing. When we were looking at how do we get people and organizations to understand that a bit of money spent up front and a bit of effort put up front will significantly reduce the likelihood of something bad happening. Or even if it does happen, it will enable your recovery to speed up and the impact to be far lower. So the conundrum really is around changing perception, belief, and thought. So let's look at a few examples. Let's look at military special forces as a good example. So when I started my career as a martial artist and defensive tactics trainer, and I'm going back a good few years now, I thought toughness was, you could do this number of sparring matches, or you could do this sort of thing, or you could work through injury. Then I went overseas and I spent a lot of time training and teaching in Israel, and I saw a different level of toughness. I was like, oh, I thought I was tough, but wow, look at that. Then I came back to South Africa and I started training bodyguards and close protectors. And I went, wow, that's a different level of tough. These guys can go for 2-3 days with almost no sleep, continuously deliver a protective service, and actually respond. Then I got our first contract with a military special forces unit, and I was like, wow. So these guys can not only go for 5 days with almost no sleep, almost no food, and still function. What does toughness actually mean? Mm-hmm. And then I kind of got into the world of corporate, and I went, the first time I had to fire somebody, I went, that sparring stuff and staying awake, that's much easier than having to fire somebody that you care about. So the challenge we've got now is this idea that resilience and toughness are interlinked. But if we go back to the idea of the way the military prepares people for this, military itself has a luxury. They are usually 95% training organization and 5% operational. So they get all this time to prepare for these things that they have to do. In business, it's the opposite, right? Most organizations are 99% doing and 1% training or preparation, if.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to change the way we look at this if we're going to get results. So one of the things that I'm working quite hard on at the moment is trying to change the paradigm of preparation and prevention away from only training to actually what are we doing in our day-to-day activities and our day-to-day functions and with our day-to-day systems that reinforces the principles that we might have been taught in training. It's the doing part that we seem to neglect. And I'm sure you've seen this, having been in this game for a long time, you might go in and run a workshop and people go, that's great. But when you leave there, they're not, they might for a week do what you wanted them to do, and then they'll just go back to whatever it is they did before.
Yeah.
So this is primarily why I became so interested in cultural change and why our risk consulting and resilience business primarily actually does risk culture and resilience culture change. And the challenge we've got with this stuff is it has to be sticky. It has to be something that sticks. Otherwise, you go in with all these great initiatives and ideas, and 6 months later or whatever it is, people are back doing whatever they did.
So how do you make something sticky to make it stick? So if I or you came back 6 months to a year later, you can find, hey, it stuck.
So I'm going to give you a snapshot of this. There's a lot to this piece, but I'm going to give you the core ingredients. And for those who are interested, please do check out some of the stuff we're doing with our accredited resilience programs. And we've just actually launched a registered resilience practitioner credential. But the key thing with this is it starts with the individual. So if I can't get somebody to actually have the basic capability to do the following: scan their environment, identify what could help them or hurt them, decide what to do once they've got that information. So that might be report, it might be ignore, it might be run, it could be any of those variables. Then actually enact that, and then do some sort of after analysis or follow-up process. So I'll give you an example. If somebody wants to buy a house or have some sort of large investment, it's a huge undertaking for most people. There's a lot of thought and effort that would go into that. What we don't often do is use that process as an opportunity to analyze how we make risk-based decisions, how we think about resilience, and what we're going to do if something goes wrong. So in any opportunity where there's a big decision, we can practice these skills. So it does start with the individual. On a personal note with this, I wrote a book about this more from a security context. And this changed for me. I was about 21 years old, a professional bodyguard. I was a world champion in my style of jiu-jitsu, and I was pretty much on top of my game back then, at least physically. And back in South Africa, I got a call one Sunday night. It was my mother. She was on the way to hospital. My stepfather had just been shot in the head in an attempted carjacking. I grabbed my go bag, rushed to the site. I almost landed up shooting 2 police officers who were stealing from the car. Got to hospital, and he passed away not too long after that. He got shot square in the forehead. And I had this epiphany. It was like a life-changing shake-up for me. And I was a young guy, it's 23 years ago, where it was like a cold, hard slap in the face that it doesn't matter how good people like you and I are, Alex, because we're not going to be there at that critical moment when somebody else needs to make the right call. And that incident, it really shook me up because I knew exactly what my mother and stepfather needed to be doing to not have been a victim of that incident. I never bothered to train them. I never educated them. I never shared that knowledge. And the consequences on a personal level were significant.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this happening to our clients on an organizational level all the time. if we want to go big picture, we see this happening with COVID now, where, the limitations in risk-based and resilience-based thinking are not being tackled in a multi-dimensional manner based on the world we live in. We're tackling them still on one dimension. So as an example, yes, COVID is primarily a health risk, okay, and we're deferring to our health experts to manage that. The problem, as we all know, is that lockdowns have now led to economic risks. They've led to mental health risks. They've led to societal risks around inclusion and the way we interrelate with each other on a human level. And I actually think this round of lockdowns, I'm seeing it now. The benefits of tackling the health problem are now not necessarily as relevant as all the other ones, because businesses are collapsing, people are mentally breaking, people are forgetting how to work and talk to each other.
Yes. People are leaving their jobs. Nurses and doctors can't cope much longer, if at all now. Yeah.
So to that point, we have to try and shift the way we think as individuals. So that was really a long-winded way of kind of going. It starts with the individual who has to actually have a realization that the voice in your own head is the most powerful influencing variable, as well as our subconscious, unconscious, or as Dan Kahneman refers to them, system one thinking behaviors. Those things we do with our thinking are the things that make us act.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, when we stop and pause and analyze, even people with a lot of bias can often be persuaded to make a different decision. It's the stuff we do intuitively, which is around 95% of all decisions we make are intuitive. They're subconscious based. And this is where we shift up now from the individual. Let's just say as individuals, we get it right. An individual goes, I want to do that. I want to be able to scan my environment, identify what's going on, make the right call, act accordingly. And I kind of relate that to all we can ask of people is to make the best possible decision in the most appropriate time frame based on the most accurate intelligence, not information, because in a world of information overload, you can almost find anything you want to back up a point of view, no matter how crazy it is.
Yeah.
All we have to look at is, flat earthers and anti-vaxxers, and the list just goes on and on.
And we, believe it or not, we have 1 minute left.
Okay, I'll give this an accelerated go. So if we get the individual to buy into it, the next step is the team. Now, this is where situational leadership comes into play. And we're not talking about people on the executive or the board yet. We're talking about somebody who has responsibility for managing someone else. That level. If that level doesn't buy into this stuff and they're not willing to look at risk resilience as part of how they get team high performance, then inevitably all you do is you get a few really high performing risk and resilience people in a workplace, and you get a bunch of people who are likely going to be victims and break.
Yeah.
Which means your organization is not resilient, neither is your team. Yeah. Because one or two superstars can't carry a team. Then when we get the team component right through that level of individual leadership, we can then look organizationally. And to your point around making things sticky, okay, there's a few things that we have to remember. And I'm aware I've probably already gone over a minute. The first one is alignment. So if our organizational corporate vision, mission, etc., say one thing, yet we're being told to do another, we're instantly out of alignment, which means people will inevitably either resonate with it or they won't. So alignment is really important. The next piece around that is embedment, or embedding what we talk about. If it's something extra, and this is where I feel we've made a big mistake with risk and resilience. We're changing it now because we've seen it hasn't worked the way we wanted to. But I'm just looking at a lot of my clients at the moment, and some are really big clients. Most of the time, risk, resilience, business continuity, safety, security, whatever it is, they sit in a little silo somewhere with almost no budget, and they're told to get on with their job on behalf of the whole organization.
Mm-hmm.
And realistically, if we look at influence capability, from a social psychology perspective, most of the time we function in units of 8 to 150 people. Okay, so one person who might be responsible for a function that spans several thousand people will not be able to do it. They cannot do it.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
What they have to do is build this influencer network so that people can influence their own tribes, their own units, their own groups. So that's what we've started doing with change and culture. We're doing this with a client at the moment. We've trained all their staff in the basics, so everybody has the personal skills. Now we're building the influencer cohort, which is roughly 15% of the entire organization population. And we're working with the executive team and the board to align all the stuff. When you get those pieces aligned and you have the last critical ingredient, which is commitment, this stuff takes time. To change an embedded behavior in an organization that's been doing it for an extended period of time will take 2 to 3 years of continuous work.
Yeah.
Most organizations go, well, here's the budget. You have a month, get it done. I don't want to hear about this again until you've sorted it.
Or audit has given us 6 months. So
yes, exactly right. Or it's an outcome of an audit, and the auditor has deemed an appropriate time to, let's talk about it, improve risk culture, or make sure disaster recovery is in place, or whatever the metric or whatever the piece is. And then some poor person sits back there in the organization going, okay, this is my job. I'm the person named in that audit who has to go and do this job. I've been given no extra budget. So my first mission is, can I get some budget? And normally people will get shot down and they go, no, do what you have to do with what you have. Then they're going, well, where do I even start? Because most of the practitioners in our world have not been trained to do culture change, influence behavior, and create leadership structures. We've been trained to do a very specific job.
Yeah.
Okay. And very often that job is based on our technical expertise to unpack pieces of a system and then figure out which of those pieces need to have redundancies, and then relate that back to, whatever the planning methodology is. We haven't been taught how to motivate people, influence people, talk to them in a language that they understand, give them incentives to make them want to do this stuff long-term, and relate it back to a WIFM, what's in it for them, what's in it for me.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes with this, if I've got a WIFM, if there's something in it for me, then can I get something in it for us? And if I can get something in it for us, then could we get something in it for the organization?
Yeah.
And if we have an ethical background to what we're doing, I call it a very simple ethical checklist. Good for me, good for you, good for us, good for the greater good. If you can tick all 4 of those boxes, you don't need risk management. Just do it. But most decisions don't tick all 4 boxes.
Yeah. None of us have really been trained on how to manage and get change initiated, because that's
100%.
really what that comes down to. There's going to be a change is needed, and we're not, in business continuity, we may be taught change management on how to update a plan, on something along that lines. I know that's a simple example. However, changing the mindsets of leadership, influencing, we're not trained on that.
So I agree with you 100%.
Trying to get buy-in is not change.
Agree. It's the precursor, right? It's the start of trying to create something that has to change. And I'm going to quote one of my behavioral scientists, Kate, who works for us. She's great. She just said, if we're not solving a problem, why bother with change? So it actually goes even a step further, that we actually first have to identify that there is a problem. Secondly, we have to be able to scope the magnitude, the import, and the impact of that problem. Then we have to relate that back to a benefit. Okay? And only then can we start the influencing. So the conundrum we've got now is the skill set required to thrive is significantly different from the skill sets even 15, 20 years ago, pre-internet age, where communication was slower, hierarchies were more established. It was different. So the challenge for us now, and everything I'm talking about now, we've actually put that all into our new resilience programs to try and as quickly as possible give risk resilience BCP people the skills, at least a basic set of skills they need to do all the other stuff. So what we've been focusing on is not how do we teach people to do a risk assessment, how do we teach people to put together, a vulnerability assessment and then a continuity plan.
There's people business continuity.
Yeah, there's plenty of other people who do that really well. In fact, even operational risk, we've kind of gone, there's almost no point training that because there's so much information, knowledge, and know-how on how to do that. The piece we're missing is what I refer to as the glue and the oil. It's those intangible, hard to measure things.
Mhm.
The good news for those of you listening to this is if you like what we're saying, the benefits are multidimensional. And this is probably the last point to leave this one with. When I say multidimensional, think of how we work now. I call it the whole of person model. Work life, personal life, virtual life. We have to train skill sets and approaches that transcend all three. Because what is the point of having the most robust, cyber security and data recovery capability if your people are leaking information on their mobile phones at home?
Yeah.
So it's an intersecting piece. What's the point of trusting somebody to manage a $10 million budget when they've got a gambling problem and they're going to be bankrupt themselves? So we have to change our thinking. And it's a really hard thing to do because managerialism is an important skill. We need it because we've got one foot in both camps in the era we're in now. It's a little bit of leadership, a little bit of managerialism, and you've got to know when to do which and how to mix them together. The conundrum, realistically, is how do we embed those behaviors, skills, and characteristics so we do them without thinking? And that opens up the topic of courage, which I believe we're out of time to explore today.
Yes, we are. We are out of time. So I knew it was going to happen. I think we got through maybe 2, 3 of our items on the list, just like last time, which is great. So we're going to have to find time to come back and talk about courage on the next one. You'll have to. You got to come back.
I would love to do that, Alex, because I think this is the courage piece is probably everything we've discussed now leads up to that. And it's the hardest part for people to get right. And we again, let's not even go there now because we'll end up for another hour. But we have to think, act, and perform differently to thrive now. And it's not just about technical capability now; it's about technical capability with all the other stuff.
Yes. Well, Gav, it's always fantastic talking to you. I really enjoy it. And obviously I don't even know why we even put an agenda together. We don't stick to it. But thanks so much for sharing your time and expertise again. And I look forward to our next discussion. I really do.
Thanks, Alex. Really appreciated it. And I hope your listeners got something out of this. And, let them feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or check out, if you now search for Presilience, we have an education site and an information site. There's a lot of free resources up there. There's a bunch of articles up there. But, I think we've just got to tackle this stuff differently. So thank you for the opportunity to share some of those thoughts.
My pleasure. I love chatting with you. This is great stuff. And I look forward to our next one. So thanks once again, Gav.
Thanks, Alex.
And to everybody listening and watching, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.